Hello, this is the second game of the final in the Fide World Cup between Liren and Radjabov. This game is an English opening, so let's take a look. C4, knight f6, knight c3, e6, e4, c5, e5. I don't like the fact that this variation allows this e5. Hitting the knight on f6, knight g8, knight f3, knight c6, developing move, and d4. White will give up the e5 pawn because this will allow the cramping of black's position. This will c takes, knight takes, knight takes, and then knight db5, threatening to go to d6 with check. If black plays, let's see, if black plays d6 right away, if d6 right away to cover that d6 square, that's not a good move because we have c5. Then if a6, knight takes, then bishop takes, c takes. And white stands a bit better. White stands better in that variation. Also, if they play f6, then maybe bishop e3, bishop e3, or f6. What if knight there, check, knight d6? This variation would be better for black. Knight d6 check immediately, then knight e7 if bishop develops, bishop e2, then castle, and black is okay here. So we have a6 instead of those sub variations. Knight check, bishop takes, queen takes, cramping black's position, f6 protecting the knight, bishop e3 developing, knight e7, and black is a pawn up, but white has compensation in that black is cramped here. Bishop b6 attacking the queen, and knight to f5 attacking white's queen. Queen to b4 protecting the bishop on b6, then knight c6, c6 attacking the queen, queen c5, queen to e7, and castles. Here I think black should have exchanged queens since he is a pawn up. I believe queen takes, then bishop takes, d6, giving the pawn back for development to loosen up the position. d6, bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes, and then king up, and then the rook will come to d8, the black rook, opposing the rook on d6, and black has more or less freed himself. White still has a problem. White still has to develop the f1 bishop and then bring the rook over, but in the meantime they would exchange rooks on the d file, and the position would be equal in this variation. So I think he should have just exchanged queens here. Instead, black plays d6, keeping the queens on the board and keeping the extra pawn. But by keeping the extra pawn, his position stays cramped. Queen to a3, black's position, castle, g4, hitting the knight, knight h6, and rook g1 protecting g4. Here, let's see, if queen takes pawn, queen takes, rook takes, then the knight takes g4. Black remains a pawn up, and his position isn't as cramped, but he has a problem with the c8 bishop. and the white bishop still covers d8. So white would still maintain his positional advantage, even though he's a pawn down. His developmental advantage, that is. But we have rook to g1, protecting g4, knight f7, protecting d6, and f4. White prepares for g5. Bishop d7, h4, a5, and then g5. And black's position is cramped. Knight to b4 would be a try here. Instead he plays king h8 and queen to b3. Instead of king h8, let's see if we take here, f takes, h takes, then knight there. Then the queen would move. White would maintain his advantage in this position. So black decides to move the king out of harm's way, out of the fire of the rook on g1, queen to b3, rook f to c8, and white has a slight advantage here. King to b1. Here, black made a mistake. Black plays e5. Better would have been simply to exchange on g5. Exchange on g5, and then play e5. That would have been better. But e5 gives way to d5 for the knight. So I don't know why he played e5, knight d5, bishop check, king moves, queen to e6. And white has a decisive advantage. There's a big advantage here. G takes, then a3. But computer suggests just simply develop the bishop on g2, knight h6, then take and take, with a big advantage for white. But instead we have a3, rook a to b8. The bishop does develop, the g2, and black hardly has an answer. If the knight moves from d5, then we can place the bishop on d5. Rook to g8. If black tries a4, then queen takes, knight to h6, and then h5. That would be a nice line. But we have rook to g8, knight to e3, making way for d5 for the bishop. Knight d4. Another try would be maybe knight e7, then exchange on e5, then knight takes e5. Black is still hopeless here in this position. Also, another try would simply be to take the bishop on g2, rook takes, hit the queen, queen to b5. White still maintains a huge advantage, and he's up the exchange in that variation. So knight d4, bishop takes d4, e takes, knight takes f5, queen takes f5, then bishop d5, attacking the knight. They exchange rooks. White has the g file. Then queen of d7 is not good also. I mean, black is in a bind here. Knight to h6. Queen to b6, that was a good move. Planning to go to c7. Queen to d7, but then he loses d4 pawn with just a huge position. Queen to e7, king to a2, knight f5, attacking the queen. Queen moves c3, b6. Black is just buying time here. I mean, it's hopeless. Now h5, that's a pretty good move. The pawn plans to go to h6, where he'll have an anchor on g7. He could probably place a rook on g7. Also, it gets it's out of line of the attack of the knight on f5. So a simple pawn move, h4, h5, rook to e8. That was a blunder. That wasn't good. Knight to e3 was his last chance for counterplay. Knight to e3, we move the bishop, and then queen to e6. And black is still hopeless here because we could probably get that rook on e1 eventually. So yeah, if b3, a4, rook to e1. So we have rook to e8, which is not good. Now h6. Finally got h6 in. If knight takes h6, we have rook to e1. If queen takes, then we have queen takes f6 mate. The point is f6 is weak. If the queen moves, the queen takes f6. That's mate. So h6, knight to e3, and then rook to e1 pins the knight. It also threatens mate. White threatens rook takes knight, queen takes f6 mate. So a very impressive display by Ding Liren to win game 2. They play again tomorrow, so we'll see what happens then. Until then, take care.